The distant roar rips through the night, a primal scream echoing through the dense forest canopy 6.4 million years ago. Darkness is a heavy veil, punctuated only by the fleeting gleam of hungry eyes. Amidst the sinister whisper of the wind through the foliage, something moves. A nimble shadow, heart pounding wildly in her chest. It's not the prey that trembles in fear. It's the huntress. And she knows. In this era of legends and ancient terrors, not everything that lurks in the darkness has claws. Some evils cannot be slain. Some evils are just felt. Welcome to a time when myths were born of fear and humanity was barely crawling in the dawn of its existence. The heavy, humid, and dense air of the tropical forest stifled every sound except for the incessant buzzing of insects and the rustling of leaves under an invisible wind. The twilight barely penetrated the canopy of the giant trees, casting elongated and distorted shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. The smell of wet earth, decaying leaves, and a strange, musty sweetness hung in the air, almost palpable. A thin mist began to rise from the damp ground, embracing the gnarled and twisted tree trunks, transforming the forest into a ghostly labyrinth. Suddenly, a sharp, prolonged hiss cut through the dense silence, followed by a dull thud. It was the sound of a huge branch breaking off an ancient tree, crashing into the green tangle below with a violence that echoed throughout the valley. Among the exposed roots and thorny bushes, a female Homo habilis named Kea moved cautiously. Her tense muscles were barely visible beneath her fine fur, and her large, dark eyes, accustomed to the dim light, scanned the surroundings for any anomaly. The thud of the branch had awakened an ancestral alert in her, a shiver that ran up her spine and settled at the back of her neck. It wasn't just a sound, but the way it had resonated, heavy, final, like an omen. She was gathering wild berries, her agile fingers separating the edible from the poisonous. But her mind was fixed on the growing unease that had plagued her since sunrise. A feeling, a scent that the elders of the clan called the whisper of the forest, which preceded great hunts or the arrival of predators. Kaya pursed her lips, the forest dirt smudging her forehead. Kaya's group, about 20 individuals, had settled in a small clearing near a winding river, seeking security and resources. But in recent days, the absence of small animals, the unnatural silence of the birds, and the persistence of a strong, unknown odor in the air had put everyone on edge. "What do you see, Kaya?" A hoarse, low voice resonated behind her. It was Zark, the eldest of the group, his face furrowed by scars and his gaze penetrating. He approached, hunched, holding a rudimentary spear. His movements were slow, but his presence was one of immense wisdom, forged in countless summers and winters. Kaya turned, the basket of leaves full of berries swaying slightly in her hand. The branch! It wasn't the wind's arc. Something knocked it down. There's a different smell in the air, stronger now. Their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. Zark sniffed the air, his nose twitching. Yes, the smell of fear. Not our fear, but that of something the forest has harbored for a long time. He clenched his fists around the spear, his knuckles white. The forest spirits are restless, Kaya. They speak to us through silence, through accidents. Whatever is causing this is approaching. Kaya looked back in the direction from which the sound of the branch had come. The shadows seemed to deepen, and the whisper of the forest, once a gentle breeze, now sounded like a distant lament. A more intense shiver ran through her. What could be so large and so ancient as to shake even the millennial trees and cause fear in a veteran like Zark? The acrid smell of smoke mingled with the sweet, damp aroma of the forest, signaling the proximity of the camp. Twilight had already turned into full night when Kaya and Zark returned, and the fire, a source of warmth and security, flickered amidst the darkness, casting flickering lights on the anxious faces of the clan. The children were huddled near the campfires, their large, curious eyes reflecting the flames. While the adults conversed in whispers, the tension palpable in the air. Smoke rose in lazy spirals, dissipating into the dense canopy of trees that surrounded the clearing, an impenetrable green wall that became an even more formidable barrier in the darkness. The distant sound of the river was the only constant sound, an eternal murmur that accompanied the lives and fears of the clan. Kaya felt the weight of her younger sister Lyra's gaze, a slender and curious girl who approached, her eyes questioning. "What happened, Kaya? Why is Zark so quiet?" Lyra whispered, her voice filled with concern. The clan relied on Zark for wisdom and Kaya for courage. Their unrest was a bad sign. Kaya touched Lyra's face, trying to convey a calm she herself did not feel. "It's nothing. Just the forest reminding us of its strength." But the lie was thin, and Lyra was not foolish. Zark was already approaching the clan chief, Thuron, a robust man with a lightning-shaped scar over his eye, who listened intently to his words, his face serious. As Zark and Theron discussed, a sharp, hoarse cry erupted from the edge of the clearing. A young hunter, who had ventured a little beyond the safety of the camp to gather firewood, stumbled into the firelight circle, his eyes wide with pure terror. He pointed to the darkness of the forest, his breath catching in his throat, words dying. His arm was scratched and a trail of dark blood stained his skin. Shadows ... moving, bigger than any wolf ... He managed to stammer before falling to the ground, convulsing. His eyes rolled back, and white foam began to form on his lips. Panic spread like wildfire. Mothers pulled their children close, and the men armed themselves with their stone-tipped spears, forming a protective circle around the camp. Zark ran to the young man, examining him with distressed eyes. "He was touched," Zark murmured, his voice deep and laden with profound sadness. "By fear, by darkness." Kaya knelt beside the young man, feeling his weak pulse. Whatever had terrified him had not bitten him, nor scratched him deeply. But the panic was so intense that it seemed to have poisoned him from within. Suddenly, a heavy, rhythmic sound began to echo from the forest. The sound of something large dragging itself, breaking dry branches. These were not the footsteps of an ordinary animal. It was slower, more deliberate, almost ritualistic. The smell in the air intensified, an odor of something putrid, mixed with a metallic stench and a strange, pungent aroma, like that of some poisonous plant. Lyra grabbed Kaya's hand, her fingers cold and trembling. "What is it, Kaya? What's coming?" Kaya looked into the darkness, feeling her own heart pound furiously against her ribs. The shadows of the forest seemed to deepen, to move, not just with the wind, but with a presence. An ancient, evil presence. She knew that what was coming was not an ordinary predator. It was something the ancients told in their whispers around the campfire. Something that until then was just a myth. And now it was at their door. What the elders called forest spirits were not the benevolent entities of their rituals, but something that had been corrupted, something that fed on terror. The night deepened, and with it, fear became an overwhelming burden, suffocating the air in the clearing. The sounds of the forest, once a familiar symphony of life and death, were now a cacophony of sinister creaks, distant howls, and the chilling hiss of something moving slowly in the darkness. The smell of decay and metal, once subtle, was now unmistakable, permeating every breath. The flickering light of the campfires seemed to recede before the invasion of the night, shrinking the clan's circle of safety. The flames cast dancing shadows on the terrified faces, transforming them into masks of anguish. Lyra trembled uncontrollably beside Kaya, her teeth chattering, and the rest of the clan was in an eerie silence, each waiting for the inevitable. Theron, the chief, tried to maintain his composure, but his voice was choked with effort. "It's not a wolf. It's not a lion. It's something that shouldn't exist," he murmured, looking at Zark, who kept his eyes fixed on the tree line. Zark nodded slowly, his face a mask of gravity. The Old Ones told stories of shadows that feed on fear, of spirits that dwell in the deepest darkness. They manifest when the balance is broken. I never thought I'd see this. A piercing sound, like that of branches being brutally snapped, came from the opposite side of the camp, making everyone turn abruptly. The sound repeated, closer each time, coming from several points in the forest. It wasn't one creature, but several, surrounding them. Kaya's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the vibration in the ground, a rhythmic tremor that announced the approach of something massive. The eyes of the female Homo habilis scoured the darkness, trying to discern shapes, but the shadows were impenetrable. Then they emerged. Not all at once, but revealing themselves slowly, like figures from a nightmare. They were shapeless creatures, humanoids, but terribly distorted. Their bodies seemed to be made of twisted roots and mud, with eyes that glowed with a dull red hue. They had no visible claws, no sharp teeth, but the aura of their presence was one of unspeakable terror. They seemed to move effortlessly among the trees, gliding silently, their forms blending into the darkness. They were not animals. They were something older, more fundamental. They were the shadows of legends, the forest spirits. One of them, larger than the others, stopped at the edge of the light circle, its red eyes fixed on the clan. It emitted a guttural sound, a low growl that seemed to echo directly in the mind, not in the ears. The young man who had stumbled into the camp began to convulse again, his agony deepening. It was as if the creatures were feeding on the terror they provoked. "They feed on our fear," Zark shouted, his voice tearing through the heavy air. "Don't show fear. Fight, or they will consume us." Despite Zark's warning, the fear was overwhelming. A young mother let out a shriek of terror and blindly ran into the forest, trying to escape. One of the shadows, with surprising agility, moved towards her. It did not pursue her, did not attack her with physical violence. It simply approached, and when the young mother was near, the shadow extended a twisted arm, but did not touch her. Instead, the young woman stopped abruptly, as if frozen. Her eyes widened, a silent scream escaped her throat, and she fell to the ground, motionless, her body still vibrating with unspeakable terror, but her eyes empty. She was dead. But there were no wounds. She had died of pure dread. Kaya felt a wave of nausea. What on earth were those things, and how could they fight them? The horror spread even faster than the plague. The clan, disoriented and paralyzed by terror, watched the scene of the young mother, now an inert body, victim of an intangible enemy. The smell of wet earth and decaying leaves mingled with the odor of death and fear, creating an unbearable atmosphere. The fire, once a symbol of warmth and hope, now seemed a weak and useless beacon against the darkness that enveloped them. The shapeless shadows of the forest continued to move slowly, their red eyes glowing like dying embers, their guttural growls echoing in everyone's minds, undermining sanity. Darren, the chief, managed to muster his courage. "We can't fight this. Run! Run now!" He bellowed, his voice hoarse but firm. "Grab the children. To the river. Maybe the water will keep them away." He knew it was a faint hope, but it was the only one. Water, in their ancestral beliefs, had always been a symbol of purification and a barrier against evil. It was the only way out. Chaos erupted. Mothers grabbed their children. Men tried to push their way through, shoving each other in their desperation. The sound of breaking branches, muffled screams, and the cries of children filled the night. Kaya grabbed Lyra's hand, squeezing it tightly. "To the river, Lyra. Run and don't look back." She pushed her sister forward, feeling the rush and urgency of the situation. Kaya found herself pushed by the mass of panicking bodies, but she didn't lose focus. Her eyes scanned the darkness, searching for a path, a less obstructed escape route. The forest, which was once their home and provider, now transformed into a nightmare labyrinth. The trees stood like dark and menacing pillars, and the hanging vines seemed like claws waiting to trap them. The damp earth slipped under their feet, and with each step, the fear increased. She could feel the presence of the shadows behind them, the low, disturbing growl echoing in her ears. It was not a physical pursuit, but a pursuit of terror, a hunt for their minds. Kaya looked back for an instant. She saw Zark, the elder, standing, throwing his spear towards one of the shadows. The weapon simply passed through the shapeless creature as if it were made of smoke. Zark then closed his eyes, and a strange, sad smile appeared on his lips before he fell to the ground, also a victim of fear, without a single visible wound. His sacrifice, his vain attempt to delay them, was a sign of how desperate the situation had become. Running desperately, Kaya and Lyra separated from the rest of the clan amidst the confusion. They found themselves on a little-used, narrow, and dark trail, flanked by thorny bushes. The smell of decay intensified, mixed with a sweet and sickly aroma. Lyra stumbled, falling to her knees, and Kaya helped her up, pulling her with all her might. "We can't stop, Lyra. They're coming." Kaya's voice was hoarse from screaming, and her lungs burned. But the sound of the river was approaching, a distant murmur that became a promise of salvation. They could hear it, the sound of running water, washing away fear and death. But would they reach it before the shadows reached them? Time was running out, and the forest, with its shadows and mysterious noises, seemed to be closing in around them. The sound of the river, once a distant and uncertain murmur, had now transformed into a promising roar, growing clearer and louder with each step. The smell of fresh water, mixed with mud and slime, began to replace the foul odor of the shadows, a relief for Kaya's lungs. Her muscles burned, and with each step, exhaustion threatened to bring her down. But Lyra's hand in her grip was a constant reminder of the need to continue. The dense vegetation finally began to thin, and the moonlight, once muffled by the tree canopies, could now be seen, a pale silver in the sky. They burst out of the dense forest, stumbling onto the muddy riverbank. The body of water was wide and dark, reflecting the distorted stars in the sky. And its current, though not furious, was strong enough to drag small objects. The sound of rushing water was a balm to their ears, a sound of life in contrast to the deadly silence of the forest. Kaya and Lyra were not alone. Some other members of the clan, scattered and terrified, had already reached the bank, their bodies trembling and eyes wide, watching the shadows that hesitated at the forest's edge. The shapeless creatures, the forest spirits, stopped at the line where land met water. Their red eyes continued to glow, but the intensity of their presence seemed to diminish. They dared not enter the water. It was as if the river, with its constant and purifying current, was an impassable barrier to their corrupted nature. The smell of decay and fear emanating from them weakened as they moved away from the forest and approached the water. There was an invisible line that prevented them from advancing, an ethereal boundary they could not cross. Kaya, breathless, felt relief wash over her body. They were safe, at least for now. But the cost had been high. Many clan members were missing. Absorbed by the darkness of the forest and the fear the shadows spread, the survivors looked at the forest with a mixture of terror and despair, some weeping silently, others in shock. "They cannot enter the water," whispered Terran, who had also arrived, exhausted, with his wife and 2 small children. His voice was choked, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Lyra turned to Kaya, her eyes still wet with fear, but now with a spark of curiosity. "What were they, Kaya? Why did they want us?" Kaya looked at the shadows in the forest, which seemed to dissolve into the darkness, becoming indistinguishable from the night itself. A premonition, a primary intuition, struck her. They were not creatures hungry for flesh. They were creatures that fed on something deeper. "It wasn't our bodies they wanted, Lyra," Kaya replied, her voice choked with emotion and exhaustion. They wanted our fear. They fed on terror. Those who fell were not attacked. They were consumed by their own fear. Kaya closed her eyes. The image of the terrified face of the young hunter and the young mother fixed in her mind. The legends told by the elders of spirits that tormented the hearts of men were not just stories. They were echoes of a dark and ancient truth. The forest spirits were the personification of dread, of the terror the first humans felt before the unknown, the inhospitable vastness of nature and mortality itself. The forest, with its silence and mysteries, had generated something that fed on what most terrified them. And now they knew this was the most terrible of hunts. Dawn was approaching, and the eastern sky began to lighten with shades of purple and pink, announcing the end of the night of terror. The morning mist hung over the river's surface, creating an ethereal, almost ghostly scene. The damp smell of the river predominated, but the faint trace of decay from the shadows still lingered in the air, a nauseating reminder of the night they had survived. The clan survivors were huddled on the riverbank, their bodies exhausted, their minds scarred by terror. The sound of muffled sobs mingled with the constant murmur of the water, a sad song for those who were lost. Kaya sat, Lyra nestled beside her, her eyes fixed on the tree line. The forest, once a home, now seemed a cursed place, a repository of unspeakable horrors. Darren, his face drawn, walked up to her. "We cannot go back to the camp, Kaya. Many were lost. And the forest. It has changed." His voice was empty, devoid of the authority it once possessed. The experience had broken them. The previous night's hunt had not been a battle of strength, but of spirit. And many had failed. Kaya nodded, her throat tight. "I know, Theron. But what will we do now? Where will we go?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Survival had been their only goal. Now, the reality of their new status as haunted nomads settled in. They had escaped the grip of the forest spirits, but not the impact they had had on their lives and their perception of the world. The sun began to rise on the horizon, casting golden rays that kissed the river's surface and illuminated the treetops. With the arrival of light, the shapeless shadows of the forest completely receded, dissolving into the foliage, becoming invisible, as if they had never existed. But the absence of their physical presence did not diminish the mark they had left. The bodies of those who had succumbed to fear still lay in the forest, a silent testimony to a threat that defied comprehension. Kaya looked at Lyra, who now watched the sunrise with calmer but still frightened eyes. "Lyra," Kaya began, her voice soft. "The myths, the elder stories. They are not just stories to scare us." Lyra stared at her, waiting. "They are warnings. The forest holds secrets, and some of them are terrible. The forest spirits, they live in fear. And they only show themselves when the fear is strong enough." The survivors began to rise, their movements slow and hesitant. The sunlight, though bringing some relief, did not dispel the aura of melancholy and uncertainty that hung over them. The migration would be a challenge, the search for a new home far from that cursed forest. But more than that, the experience of that night would plant a seed of a new kind of fear in the minds of the first humans. A fear not of visible predators, but of something intangible, something that lived in the darkness of their own minds. As the clan prepared to follow the river's course in search of a new refuge, Kaya paused for a moment, looking back at the dense and now silent forest. The smell of wet earth returned, but now it would always carry the memory of that putrid and metallic odor. Life had changed. They had faced something that transcended hunting and survival. There was a new knowledge, a new myth that would be born from that night. The myth of the forest spirits, entities that fed on the soul itself. And Kaya knew with a cold certainty that even in a new home, the seed of fear had been planted. And with every shadow that danced in their fires, with every whisper of the wind in the darkness, the memory of the red eyes would return. Because, although the spirits had retreated, the fear they represented would never die, and would continue to shape human history in its darkest nights. The river would carry them away, but the echo of terror would remain. And the next night, in a new place, the darkness would bring with it the memories, and the dread would root itself even deeper.